Tonight's talk is about a concept that is as old as the hills, as common as clouds in the sky, and as current as this week's news. And that concept is one of non-separation. Non-separation is a key tenet in many spiritual traditions, including Buddhism. And it's also a foundation in modern science, the truth of how the world really is. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But so much of the time, what we're aware of and what we believe is its opposite, which is separation. Separation is named in the Buddhist teachings as a cause of suffering, along with being born, aging, dying, pain, sorrow. In essence, not getting what's wanted. And all of these events and experiences, of course, are often seen as points of separation. We have this tendency to externalize anything that's outside our bodies, and then we become consumed with thoughts about how to take care of this body, how to protect ourselves. Albert Einstein wrote, "A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He or she experiences him, herself, thoughts, feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness." Even talking about the concept of non-separation, we're hindered by language. Just the fact of words, time, space, this, that, you, me, us, them. Language really fosters a sense of separation as well. So a little experiment. Take a look at this, just a sheet of paper, and tell me what you see. Can you see a cloud floating in this sheet of paper? Because without a cloud, there would be no rain. And without rain, of course, trees cannot grow. And without trees, we cannot make paper. So the cloud is essential for this paper to exist. And this is Thich Nhat Hanh. Some of you may be familiar with this metaphor. He's writing about a concept that he termed interbeing. Interbeing being a word that combines the prefix inter with the verb to be, hence interbe. So again, without a cloud, we can't have paper. So we can say that the cloud and the sheet of paper inter-are. By the same token, you cannot just be by yourself alone. You have to interbe with every other thing. This sheet of paper is because everything is. And if we look a little more deeply into this sheet of paper, we can see the sunshine. Of course, without sunshine, nothing grows. We cannot grow. So sunshine is also in this sheet of paper. The sunshine and the paper inter-are. If we were to continue to look, we could see the logger who cut the tree, brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. And we see the wheat. We know the logger can't exist without bread. Therefore, the wheat that became his bread is also in this sheet of paper. And the logger's father and mother are in it as well. And if we look once more, we can see that we are in it as well. The sheet of paper is part of our perception. Your mind is in here, and mine also. So we could say that everything is in here with this sheet of paper. You can't point out one thing that's not in here. time, space, the earth, rain, minerals, sunshine, cloud, river, heat. Everything coexists within this sheet of paper. To be is to enter be. You cannot just be by yourself alone. You enter be with every other thing. You may recall another metaphor, the jewel net of Indra, which is also about an interbeing, an interconnectedness. And this one's represented by a net that's been hung so that it stretches out infinitely in all directions. And at each node of the net, each eye, so to speak, there is a single glittering jewel. And since the net itself is infinite, the jewels, glittering like stars, are infinite in number. If you look at one jewel closely, you would discover that in its polished surface are reflected all the other jewels in the net. Not only that, but each of the jewels reflected in this one jewel is also reflecting all the other jewels, so that there are infinite reflections happening. So interconnectedness, interbeing. And here's an example that comes from the physical sciences. A scientist writes, or asks a question rather, at what point did your last breath of air, sip of water, or bite of food cease to be a part of the outside world and become you? Precisely when did your exhalations and your wastes cease being you? Take a minute to reflect on this cognitively and in the body, breathing in, breathing out. What is this? He goes on to say that our skin is as much permeable membrane as barrier. It's difficult to discern where you end and the remainder of the world begins. Our internal metabolisms are intimately interwoven with earthly metabolism. One result is that every 7 years or so, the replacement of every atom in the body occurs. Well, you might respond, okay, all right, so everything changes over time. Well, still, so what? At any given moment, you could readily separate self from other. Not quite, according to science. It turns out that you are not one life form, oneself, but many. Your mouth alone contains more than 700 different kinds of bacteria. Your skin and your eyelashes are equally laden with microbes, and your gut houses a bevy of bacterial sidekicks. Although this still leaves several bacteria-free regions in a healthy body, your brain, spine, blood, current estimates indicate that your physical self possesses about 1 trillion human cells and about 10 trillion bacterial cells. In other words, at any given moment, your body is about 90% non-human, home to many more life forms than the number of people presently living on the planet. Actually, more than the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. To make things even more interesting still, microbiological research demonstrates that we are utterly dependent on this ever-changing bacterial parade for all kinds of services. We keep intruders at bay, convert food to usable nutrients, are just two examples. So if we continually exchange matter with the outside world, if our bodies are completely renewed every few years, and if each of us is a walking colony of trillions of largely symbiotic life forms, exactly what is this self that we view as separate? We're not isolated beings. Each of us is like a whirlpool, like a brief, ever shifting concentration of energy in a vast river that's been flowing for billions of years. And the question is, can we take this in? Can we learn to see ourselves not as isolated selves, but as permeable and interwoven, as processes deeply and inextricably embedded in an ancient flow? So let's bring this biological truth of non separation, both from Thich Nhat Hanh's philosophy of interbeing and modern science's understanding of non separation. Let's bring it to our lives here, today, now, in 2020. With COVID 19, we've all been in a place of varying degrees of separation from each other, some with the luxury of quarantining, some having no free choice, no freedom because of housing density or family needs or illness or essential jobs. Our attention has been laser focused in recent months because we've had to keep grappling with the daily challenges that don't remain the same. Where you're making decisions about getting food, about protecting ourselves, protecting others, surviving physically, emotionally, deciding when and whether to touch or hug. And for many, these decisions come largely from a geographical space of separation. To protect ourselves and each other, we must remain separate. And looking back to early March when we were perhaps a little more separate physically than now, but maybe we felt closer to each other because initially we were sharing a recognition of global pandemic uncertainty, layered with lots of anxiety and worry. And over time, we slowly began to adapt to a new normal, scrubbing, zooming, masking, distancing, changing routines and habits, continually weighing new information with how to live now. In the US, mid April through May uh, ushered in a splintering of responses to the pandemic, some convinced that the worst was over, and others still abundantly cautious. Simultaneously, our awareness of the economic gaps, the health disparities, and systemic divides grew. We saw what certain conditions of culture, fostered by greed, hatred, ignorance, what they've given rise to, particularly in the lives in this nation, but also in the world. On the one hand, we may have noticed that the clear skies of April indicated a reflection of clean air for the planet. The earth could actually breathe a little bit easier. But the pain of economic inequality, of othering, of racism came into sharp focus, watching as we were from our hunkered down state of relative immobility. And on May 25th, the day that George Floyd died, we witnessed a graphic event that woke many to a profound gut level knowing of non separation. There was a kind of unassailable rightness, an unshakable truth in this knowing. Suddenly, Martin Luther King's words made sense, not just cognitively, but we felt it in our bodies. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Alice Walker wrote in The Color Purple, "I knew that if I cut a tree, my arm would bleed." And this is from the Suttas. A being who has not been your mother at one time in the past is not easy to find. A being who has not been your father at one time in the past is not easy to find. A being who has not been your brother at one time in the past is not easy to find. A being who has not been your sister in the past is not easy to find. A being who has not been your son in the past is not easy to find. A being who has not been your daughter at one time in the past is not easy to find. So I'd like to offer a bit of a guided practice around this idea of interconnection, interbeing. So wherever you are, just sitting back in your seats, closing the eyes if that's comfortable for you, and feeling the body sitting here. And for a moment, if you would, reflecting, going back to your birth, when convention says your life began, and considering that you existed in your mother's womb for many months before your birth, the egg and sperm joined to create you, and your mother's egg divided to determine which genes she would pass to you while she was a fetus inside her mother, your grandmother. So, for a moment, contemplating your parents and your four grandparents, who were they? How did they live? And then continuing to look deeper. Your ancestors double each generation: two parents, four grandparents, eight great grandparents, and so on. Go back 1,000 years, some roughly 40 generations. 1,000 years ago, you had 1 trillion ancestors. The genes in every cell of your body were then shared among those ancestors, spread around the globe: Europe, Asia, Africa, America. Who were they? How did they live? Going back farther to 1 billion years. And you've now been joined in your ancestral journey by all living species that we recognize in our daily lives. You are the wolf, the bear, the whale, the salmon, the pine tree. Your ancestors are simple single cell organisms living in the waters of the primitive earth. Who were they? How did they live? the last step in your journey 4 billion years ago. No signs of life here. The stream of ancestors that you've been following has ended in a series of complex chemical reactions in which non living elements are becoming the simplest of possible living organisms. Contemplate the beginning of your life. And in your own time, opening your eyes. So, this power of seeing more deeply through perhaps multiple understandings of non separation is really the basis for wisdom and compassion to arise. And one of our challenges now is to keep waking up to the truth of non separation. We keep asking the question, how can I let go of separation? A sense of separation between me and the world. How do I rediscover non separation? Well, and these questions are actually the beginning of that journey of discovery. Just the asking invites us to peel off layers of conditioning, of mindsets or beliefs that we've held. And the invitation is to look closely, to remember, to live maybe a little more lightly, more freely. We meet ourselves when asking these questions as a constantly changing field of experience. We're actually more transparent than we first thought. And we get a glimpse of not self, of emptiness. And this in turn helps to remove the veil or the filter through which we ordinarily view the world. And with a deeper level of understanding, with these experiences, we get a feeling for what's true, the truth of non separation. And then we can act out of an affinity, a compassion for ourselves, for all beings. And that's out of a sense of profound knowing, not intellectual philosophy. It's inevitable that the habits of the mind will return, grasping, clinging, ill will, confusion. They'll all arise again, and they'll obscure the natural recognition of non separation. But we remember, we face fear, uncertainty, and we befriend this forgetting. We can say to ourselves, responding wisely for myself, for those I know, for those I don't know, even for those I feel hostility towards or loathe at times. We remember our practices of kindness, the compassion practice that Mary Louise offered tonight, practices of appreciation, of benevolence, of generosity, of kind speech. And when the door is shut or slammed, we remember to trust our intuition. We survey the landscape and see the obstacles and ask the question, where might water flow here, down, around, and through the obstacles. Responding wisely for myself, for those I know, for those I don't know, even for those I feel hostility towards. We remember the profound human connection of non-separation that the world so desperately needs. We remember the felt sense of non-separation in our cells, in our hearts. And we remember that we have this capacity to wake up again and again, to know what's true, to discern what matters. Influenced and influencing how we perceive people and all living beings and the planet, we can tilt towards a wise, non-harming way of being, way of living. So I'll close with a poem entitled, "Call Me by My True Names." Do not say that I'll depart tomorrow, because even today I still arrive. Look deeply. I arrive in every second, to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with wings still fragile, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, in order to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that are alive. I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river. And I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I'm the frog swimming happily in the clear pond. And I am also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I'm the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I'm the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom in all walks of life. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion.